Welcome back to Her Journey, where women share their most profound moments of transformation. I'm your host, and today we have Evelyn White, a 65-year-old woman whose story will challenge everything you think you know about family loyalty. This is about betrayal that runs deeper than blood, about trust that saves lives, and about the kind of justice that comes not from courts, but from a mother's broken heart. If you're ready for a story that will leave you questioning every family gathering you've ever attended, then settle in. This one will haunt you. Before we dive into Evelyn's truth, I need you to understand something. The stories we share here aren't just entertainment. They're warnings, lessons, and sometimes they're the justice system working in ways the law never could. Don't just listen and leave. Hit subscribe so you'll never miss another story that speaks to your soul. Ring that notification bell because these stories, these truths, they matter more than you know. And if Evelyn's journey moves you, drop a comment below. Your support means everything to these brave women sharing their darkest moments. My name is Evelyn White, and I need to tell you about the day my 11-year-old grandson saved my life by warning me that my own daughter was planning to kill me. It was October 15th, a Saturday afternoon that started like any family celebration should. The autumn sun was filtering through the maple trees in my daughter Marissa's front yard, casting everything in that golden light that makes you think of gratitude and togetherness. The kind of light that belongs in family photos and holiday memories. I had driven 40 minutes from my home in Riverside to attend Marissa's 40th birthday party. At 65, I still made the effort to be present for every important moment in my family's life, even when those moments felt increasingly strained. Marissa had been distant for the past few years, but I attributed it to the normal evolution of a mother-daughter relationship. She was busy with her own life, her own family, her own struggles. I should have recognized the signs that it was something much darker. The house was decorated beautifully. Marissa had always had an eye for presentation. Purple and gold streamers hung from the ceiling, matching the sophisticated color scheme she'd chosen for her milestone birthday. There were probably 30 people there, neighbors, co-workers, family friends, and a few relatives from both sides of the family. The kind of gathering that should have felt warm and welcoming. But the moment I walked through the front door, I sensed something was wrong. It wasn't anything obvious. No one was rude to me. No one gave me strange looks. If anything, Marissa seemed almost overly cheerful when she greeted me, her smile a little too bright, her hug a little too tight. Like someone performing the role of a loving daughter for an audience.
Mom.
"I'm so glad you could make it," she said, her voice carrying that forced enthusiasm I'd been hearing more and more lately. "You look beautiful." I was wearing a navy blue dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, something elegant, but not attention-grabbing. At 65, I've learned the art of looking put together without upstaging the guest of honor. My silver hair was styled in the soft waves I'd worn for years, and I'd taken care with my makeup, wanting to look my best for my daughter's special day. "Thank you, sweetheart. The house looks wonderful. You've outdone yourself." "Oh, you know me," she laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I always go overboard for parties." She introduced me to a few people I hadn't met before, new neighbors, colleagues from her job at the insurance company. I made polite conversation, asked about their families, complimented the decorations. All the small rituals of family gatherings that I'd been performing for decades. But underneath the pleasant surface, I could feel tension humming like a live wire. It was in the way Marissa's husband, Rick, avoided making eye contact with me. It was in the way conversations seemed to pause when I approached groups of people. It was in the way my grandson Tyler kept watching me from across the room, his young face serious in a way that made my chest tighten with worry. Tyler was 11, caught in that awkward space between childhood and adolescence, but he'd always been an unusually perceptive child. Even as a toddler, he'd been the one to notice when someone was sad, when tension was building, when adults were saying one thing but meaning another. I'd always thought it was a gift, this emotional intelligence he possessed. That day, it became my salvation. The party moved through its predictable rhythms. We ate lunch, sandwiches and salads arranged beautifully on Marissa's good china. We sang Happy Birthday and watched her blow out the candles on an elaborate chocolate cake. We sat in the living room while she opened presents, exclaiming over each gift with appropriate enthusiasm. I had brought her a pearl necklace that had belonged to my mother, a family heirloom I'd been saving for a special occasion. When Marissa opened the small velvet box, her face went through a series of expressions I couldn't quite read. "Mom, this is Grandma's necklace." "I thought it was time you had it," I said. "You're 40 now. A woman with your own family, your own life. It belongs to you." She stared at the pearls for a long moment, and I could have sworn I saw something like regret flicker across her features. But then she looked up and smiled, and the moment was gone. "Thank you. It's beautiful." But she didn't put it on, and she closed the box with a finality that felt somehow ominous. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself gravitating toward Tyler. He was quieter than usual, staying close to the walls, watching everything with those serious dark eyes he'd inherited from his father. When I finally managed to catch him alone in the kitchen, I knelt down to his level. "You seem worried about something, sweetheart. Is everything okay?" He looked around nervously, as if checking to make sure no one was listening. Then he grabbed my hand and pulled me further into the corner, behind the kitchen island where we couldn't be seen from the living room. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice urgent and scared. "You need to leave here now." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What? Why?" "Just go now, please. Don't ask questions. Just trust me." I stared at this child, this baby I'd helped raise, who called me when he had nightmares, who still wanted me to read him stories when I babysat, and I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not the kind of fear children have about monsters under the bed or thunderstorms. Real fear. Adult fear. "Tyler, you're scaring me. What's wrong?" He glanced toward the living room again, then back at me. "I can't tell you here."
"But please, Grandma."
"Please just leave. Say you don't feel good or something. But go home."
Now.
Every instinct I had as a mother and grandmother was screaming that something was terribly wrong. Tyler wasn't a dramatic child. He didn't make things up or exaggerate for attention. If he was this frightened, this urgent, there was a reason. "Okay," I said quietly. "Okay, sweetheart. I'll go." The relief that flooded his face was immediate and heartbreaking. "Thank you. Thank you for trusting me." I stood up and smoothed my dress, trying to look normal, trying to think of a plausible excuse for leaving early. The logical part of my brain was telling me this was crazy, that I was letting an 11-year-old's imagination upset a perfectly normal family gathering. But the deeper part of my brain, the part that had kept me alive for 65 years, was screaming that Tyler was right. I went back to the living room and found Marissa arranging empty glasses on a tray. "Sweetheart, I'm afraid I'm going to have to head home. I'm getting one of my headaches." She looked up quickly, and for just a moment, I saw something that looked almost like panic cross her face. "Oh no. Can't you stay a little longer? We haven't had a chance to really talk."
"I'm sorry, honey."
"You know how these headaches get when I don't catch them early." "Of course," she said, but her voice sounded strained. "Let me at least get you something for the road. I opened a bottle of champagne earlier. Why don't you take a glass with you? It might help with the headache." She was already moving toward the kitchen, reaching for a champagne flute that sat alone on the counter. Something about the way she moved, the eagerness in her voice, made every alarm bell in my head start ringing. "That's sweet of you, but I shouldn't drink with a headache coming on," I said quickly. "I'll just head home and lie down." "Are you sure? It's really good champagne. I got it specially for today." "I'm sure. Thank you, though." I could see the frustration in her eyes, though she covered it quickly with concern. Well, drive carefully. Call me when you get home, so I know you made it safely. I hugged her goodbye, and as I did, I felt her body tense against mine. Not the natural tension of worry, but something else. Something that felt like barely contained energy, like a spring wound too tight. Tyler appeared at my side as I was gathering my purse and jacket. "Feel better, Grandma," he said, but his eyes were saying something entirely different. They were saying goodbye in a way that made my heart clench. I kissed his forehead and whispered, "I'll call you tomorrow." The drive home was surreal. I kept replaying the afternoon in my mind, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Tyler's fear, Marissa's strange insistence that I drink the champagne, the way everyone seemed to be performing their roles rather than actually enjoying themselves. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I was shaking. I lived in a small but comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where you know your neighbors and feel safe, leaving your doors unlocked. It had been my home for 20 years, since my husband Robert died, and I needed something smaller, more manageable. It was my sanctuary, filled with photos and memories and the comfortable routines of a life well lived. That night, it felt like a fortress. I double-checked the locks on all my doors and windows, something I hadn't done in years. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something terrible, though I had no idea what. I was right to trust my grandson. I was right to listen to that voice in my head that said run. Because at that very moment, other guests at the party were beginning to feel sick. Very sick. And by morning, I would know exactly what my daughter had been planning to do to me. The fear in Tyler's voice, the panic in a child's eyes. If you're a parent or grandparent, you know that sound cuts straight through your soul. Evelyn trusted her instincts and her grandson's warning, but what she was about to discover would shatter everything she thought she knew about her own family. Hit that like button if you're feeling that same chill down your spine that I am, and remember, sometimes the people who love us most are the ones who see the danger we can't. Share this chapter if you know someone who needs to trust their instincts more. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Tyler's terrified face, heard the urgency in his voice. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that there was a perfectly innocent explanation for everything that had happened at the party. By 6 a.m., I had given up on sleep entirely. I made coffee and sat in my kitchen, watching the sunrise through the window above my sink. The familiar routine should have been comforting, but my hands were still shaking as I lifted the mug to my lips. The phone rang at 7:15. "Evelyn? Thank God you're okay." It was my sister Margaret, and she sounded breathless with panic. "Of course I'm okay. Why wouldn't I be? Haven't you heard? About the party yesterday?" My blood turned to ice. "What about the party?" "Honey, 6 people are in the hospital. Food poisoning, they think, but it's bad. Really bad. They're saying it might have been something in the food or drinks." The coffee mug slipped from my hands and shattered on the kitchen floor, sending hot liquid and ceramic shards across the tiles. But I barely noticed. All I could hear was Margaret's voice, telling me that people who had been laughing and eating cake just hours ago were now fighting for their lives.
Who?
I managed to whisper. "Who's in the hospital?" "The Hendersons from next door to Marissa, that young couple with the baby. Mrs. Patterson from the church. Rick's brother David and his wife. And 2 others I don't know. Maybe work friends of Marissa's."
6 people.
6 people who had been at my daughter's birthday party were now in intensive care. 6 people who had consumed something that I had been offered but refused. "Evelyn, are you there?" "I'm here," I said, though my voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. Has anyone called the police?" "I don't know. I just heard about it from Nancy Patterson. She called me when they rushed her mother to the emergency room." "Evelyn, if you had stayed at the party..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. We both knew what she was saying. If I had stayed at the party, If I had accepted that glass of champagne Marissa was so eager to give me, I would be in the hospital too. Or worse. I have to go, I said. Evelyn, wait dash. I hung up and stood in my kitchen, surrounded by broken porcelain and spilled coffee, trying to process what I had just learned. 6 people poisoned at my daughter's birthday party. 6 people who had eaten and drunk the same things I had been offered. The same champagne Marissa had been so insistent I take with me. My legs gave out, and I sank into one of my kitchen chairs, my mind racing. It could be a coincidence. Food poisoning happened at parties sometimes. Contaminated shellfish, improperly stored dairy, cross-contamination in the kitchen. There were a dozen innocent explanations. But Tyler's face kept swimming before my eyes. That look of desperate fear, the way he'd begged me to leave immediately. He had known. Somehow, my 11-year-old grandson had known that something terrible was going to happen at that party. I was still sitting there, staring at the mess on my floor, when I heard a soft tapping at my back door. It was barely 8 a.m., too early for visitors, too soft for a delivery person. My heart started racing as I approached the door, wondering if I should call the police. But when I peeked through the curtain, I saw Tyler standing on my back porch, still in his pajamas, his hair messy from sleep. He looked small and scared and desperate. I opened the door immediately. Tyler, what are you doing here? How did you get here? I rode my bike, he said, glancing nervously over his shoulder. Mom and Dad are at the hospital. They went early this morning when people started getting sick.
Come in, sweetheart.
Come in right now. He stepped into my kitchen, and I could see that he'd been crying. His eyes were red and swollen, and his whole body was trembling. I'm sorry about the mess, I said, gesturing to the broken coffee mug. I just heard about what happened. Are you okay? Are your parents okay? We're fine, he said quickly. We didn't eat the same food as everyone else. Mom made sure of that. The way he said it made my blood freeze. What do you mean? Tyler looked around my kitchen as if he was checking for hidden listeners, then moved closer to me. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Grandma, I have to tell you something, but you have to promise you won't tell anyone I told you. I knelt down so we were at eye level, placing my hands gently on his shoulders. Tyler, you can tell me anything. Anything at all. But if someone is in danger, dash. You are in danger, he interrupted, his voice cracking with emotion. That's why I told you to leave. I heard Mom talking to someone on the phone the night before the party. She said that tonight, you would be gone for good. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs in a rush, and for a moment, the room seemed to spin around me. What exactly did you hear? I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. Tyler's eyes filled with tears. She was in her bedroom, talking really quietly. I was supposed to be asleep, but I got up to get a drink of water. Her door was open just a little bit, and I heard her say your name. She said it has to look like an accident. Something that affects everyone, not just her. And then she said by tomorrow night, she'll be gone for good. I sank back on my heels, my mind reeling. My own daughter, my own child, whom I had carried for 9 months, raised for 40 years, loved with every fiber of my being. She had planned to kill me. Did you hear anything else? Tyler nodded miserably. She talked about putting something in your champagne glass. Something that would make you sick like the others, but worse. Because you're older, she said. She said it would look like you just couldn't handle the stress on your heart. I thought about that moment in the kitchen when Marissa had been so eager to give me that glass of champagne. The way she'd reached for a specific flute that had been sitting alone on the counter. The frustration in her eyes when I'd refused it. She had tried to murder me at her own birthday party in front of dozens of witnesses and make it look like I was just another victim of accidental food poisoning. Tyler, I said gently, did you tell your parents what you heard? He shook his head quickly. I can't. Dad would never believe it. And Mom, Grandma, I'm scared of Mom now. I'm scared of what she might do if she finds out I know. This beautiful, brave child had been living with this terrible knowledge for over 24 hours, protecting me with his silence and his warning. He had risked his own safety to save my life. You did the right thing, I told him, pulling him into a tight hug. You saved my life, sweetheart. Do you understand that? You saved my life. He clung to me, and I could feel his small body shaking with fear and relief. We stayed like that for several minutes, holding each other in my quiet kitchen, both of us trying to process the magnitude of what we now knew. When Tyler finally pulled away, his face was streaked with tears but determined. What are we going to do, Grandma? It was such an adult question from such a young person. He had been forced to grow up overnight, to make impossible decisions, to carry knowledge that no child should ever have to bear. I don't know yet, I said honestly. But I promise you this, you're going to be safe. Whatever happens, I will make sure you're safe. He nodded, trusting me completely in the way that only children can. I should go home before they get back from the hospital. If they find out I was here, can you get back safely? Do you want me to drive you? I'll be okay. It's not far and nobody's up yet. I walked him to the back door and watched as he retrieved his bicycle from behind my garden shed. Before he left, he turned back to me one more time. Grandma, I love you. I'm sorry Mom tried to hurt you. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know. And this isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. He nodded and pedaled away, leaving me standing in my doorway, watching my grandson disappear into the morning mist. He nodded and pedaled away, leaving me standing in my doorway, watching my grandson disappear into the morning mist. After he was gone, I went back inside and really looked at what I was facing. My daughter had tried to kill me. She had poisoned 6 innocent people to cover up her attempt on my life. She was willing to let strangers die to achieve her goal of murdering her own mother. And she had come terrifyingly close to succeeding. I spent the rest of the morning cleaning up the broken coffee mug and thinking about what Tyler had told me. The pieces were starting to fit together in ways that made my chest tight with dread. This wasn't a sudden decision, a moment of rage or desperation. This had been planned, calculated, orchestrated with the kind of cold precision that suggested Marissa had been thinking about killing me for a long time.
But why?
What had I done that was so unforgivable that my own daughter wanted me dead? I was about to find out that the answer to that question was more complicated and more devastating than I could have ever imagined. Can you feel your heart racing? The realization that your own child, the person you brought into this world and loved unconditionally, could plan your murder with such cold calculation? Tyler's bravery saved Evelyn's life, but now she's faced with a truth that would destroy most people. What would you do if you discovered your own family member had tried to kill you? The comments are already flooding in with theories, and I can see this story is hitting close to home for many of you. Keep watching, because Evelyn's about to uncover the real reason behind her daughter's murderous intent. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I went to my bedroom closet and pulled down a dusty cardboard box from the top shelf, the box that contained all the legal documents from the worst period of my life. Inside were contracts, court papers, bank statements, and correspondence from lawyers I'd hoped never to think about again. Documents that told the story of a family torn apart by money, grief, and accusations that I thought had been buried with my husband. But as I spread the papers across my dining room table, I began to understand that some wounds never really heal. They just fester beneath the surface, growing more toxic with each passing year. Robert, my husband of 38 years, had died 7 years ago after a brief but brutal battle with cancer. He'd been a successful contractor, a man who'd built his business from nothing and accumulated considerable wealth through careful investments and smart real estate decisions. When he died, He left behind an estate worth just over $2 million. In his will, Robert had left specific bequests to our daughter Marissa and our son Daniel, who lived in California with his own family. Each of them received $50,000 outright, plus trust funds for their children's education. The remainder of the estate, the house, the investment accounts, the business assets, came to me. At the time, it had seemed reasonable. I was his wife of nearly 4 decades. We had built that wealth together, and I would need it to support myself for the rest of my life. The children were adults with their own careers and families. They weren't being left with nothing. They were receiving substantial amounts that would help secure their futures. But Marissa had seen it differently. I found the letter she'd written to me 6 months after Robert's funeral, when the will had been through probate and the estate had been settled. Reading it again after all these years, I felt the same mixture of hurt and bewilderment I'd experienced when I first received it.
Mom,
I can't believe you're actually going through with this. Dad's will was written when Daniel and I were young and had nothing. We have families now, responsibilities, futures to plan for. You're 60 years old with no dependents and no major expenses. You don't need $2 million. I've talked to a lawyer about contesting the will. He says we have grounds, especially if we can prove Dad wasn't in his right mind during his illness. I don't want to do this, but you're forcing me to choose between my family's financial security and preserving our relationship. Please reconsider. Do the right thing and divide the estate equally among the 3 of us. It's what Dad would have wanted if he'd really thought about it. Marissa. I remembered the phone call that had followed that letter. Marissa had been cold, almost businesslike, as she outlined her demands. When I tried to explain that the will reflected Robert's actual wishes, that he discussed his reasoning with me many times, she'd accused me of manipulating him during his illness. You were alone with him in the hospital for weeks, she'd said. You could have convinced him to change anything. He was on so much medication, he probably didn't even understand what he was signing. The accusation had been like a knife to my heart. The suggestion that I had taken advantage of my dying husband's vulnerability, that I had somehow coerced him into leaving me the bulk of his life's work, was so far from the truth that I could barely find words to respond. Marissa, that's not what happened. Your father was very clear about his wishes. He wanted to make sure I would be taken care of Dash. You don't need to be taken care of, she'd shouted, her composure finally cracking. You're healthy, you could work if you wanted to, you could downsize and live comfortably on half that money. Daniel and I have children to educate, mortgages to pay, futures to plan for. We need that money more than you do.
Need.
It always came back to need with Marissa. Not love, not respect for her father's wishes, not concern for my well-being. Just need, and the belief that her needs should take precedence over everything else. When I'd refused to voluntarily redistribute the inheritance, Marissa had made good on her threat to contest the will. For 18 months, our family had been locked in a bitter legal battle that consumed tens of thousands of dollars in attorney fees and destroyed any remaining relationship between us. The case had ultimately been dismissed. Robert's will was ironclad, written by an excellent attorney and witnessed by multiple people who could testify to his mental competency. But the damage to our family had been irreversible. Daniel had tried to stay neutral, but the stress of the situation had strained his relationship with both Marissa and me. He'd moved to California shortly after the legal battle ended, claiming his company had offered him a better position there. But I knew he was really fleeing the toxic atmosphere that had enveloped our family. Marissa and I had maintained a superficial relationship over the past few years. We spoke on holidays, attended each other's major life events, and pretended that everything was normal. But underneath the polite facade, I could feel her resentment burning like a slow fire. I'd told myself that time would heal the wounds, that she would eventually come to understand that I wasn't her enemy. I'd convinced myself that the tension I felt during our interactions was just the normal awkwardness that follows family conflict. I'd been wrong. Instead of healing, her resentment had metastasized into something much darker. Looking at those old documents, I could see the progression clearly now. The disappointed daughter, who felt cheated out of her inheritance, had become a woman who believed her mother was standing between her and the life she deserved. And eventually, that woman had decided that the only solution was to remove the obstacle permanently. The phone rang, interrupting my dark thoughts. It was Margaret again. "Evelyn, have you heard any updates about the people in the hospital?" "No, I've been thinking about other things." "How are they doing?" "Better, thank God. The doctors think they're all going to recover, but it was touch and go for a while. They're saying it was definitely some kind of poisoning, but they can't figure out what caused it. The health department is investigating the catering company and all the food suppliers." Of course they couldn't figure out what caused it. The investigation would focus on accidental contamination, not deliberate poisoning. They would look for sloppy food handling, contaminated ingredients, maybe a disgruntled employee at the catering company. They would never think to investigate the hostess herself. "Evelyn, are you still there?" "I'm here. It's so shocking. I can't believe something like this happened at a family party." "I know. But thank God you left early. If you had been there, if you had gotten sick too?" "I don't even want to think about it." "Neither did I. But I was thinking about it. I was thinking about how close I had come to dying at my daughter's hands, and how no one else would ever know the truth." After I hung up with Margaret, I sat in my quiet house and tried to decide what to do with the knowledge Tyler had given me. I could go to the police, but what proof did I have? The word of an 11-year-old boy against his mother? Even if they believed Tyler's story about overhearing a phone conversation, there was no physical evidence that Marissa had deliberately poisoned anyone. The investigation would focus on the catering company and their suppliers. If they found evidence of contamination, it would be attributed to accident or negligence. If they didn't find any evidence, the case would remain unsolved. Either way, Marissa would escape justice. But more importantly, Tyler would be in danger. If Marissa discovered that her son had overheard her plans and warned me, what would she do to protect herself? A woman who was willing to kill her own mother to get her inheritance might be willing to hurt her own child to keep him quiet. The thought made my blood run cold. I couldn't go to the police. Not yet. Not until I had more evidence, or a plan that would protect Tyler from his mother's rage. But I couldn't just do nothing either. Marissa had tried to kill me once, and she would try again. The 6 people in the hospital were proof of how far she was willing to go, how many innocent lives she was willing to sacrifice to achieve her goal. I needed help. I needed someone who could investigate without raising suspicion, someone who could gather evidence without putting Tyler at risk. I needed someone who operated outside the normal channels of law and order. That evening, I made a phone call I hadn't made in 20 years. To a man named Cole Davidson, who had worked with my husband in the early days of his construction business. Cole had been Robert's partner until they'd had a falling out over some questionable business practices that Robert couldn't stomach. Cole had gone on to run what he called a private consulting business, a euphemism for the kind of work that decent people preferred not to know about. Robert had cut ties with him completely, but he'd never forgotten the skills that had made Cole valuable in the first place. "Evelyn White," Cole said when he answered the phone, his voice warm with surprise. "I heard about Robert's passing. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you, Cole. I'm calling because I need help with something. Something that requires your particular expertise." There was a pause. "I see. What kind of help?" I told him everything. About the party, about Tyler's warning, about the 6 people in the hospital. I told him about the legal battle over Robert's will and the years of resentment that had followed. I told him about my suspicions and my fears and my desperate need to protect my grandson. Cole listened without interrupting, asking only occasional clarifying questions. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "That's a serious accusation, Evelyn. You're talking about murder, attempted murder, and conspiracy. If you're right about this, your daughter is a very dangerous person.
I know.
That's why I need your help. What exactly do you want me to do? I thought about that question for a long time before answering. What did I want? Justice? Protection? Revenge? All of the above, I realized. I wanted Marissa to pay for what she'd tried to do to me and for what she'd done to 6 innocent people. I wanted Tyler to be safe from his mother's murderous ambitions. And I wanted to make sure that my daughter never had another opportunity to hurt anyone else. I want you to investigate, I said finally. I want you to find proof of what she did. And then I want you to help me decide what to do about it. That could get complicated. And expensive. Money isn't an issue. It never was with your family, Cole said with a dry chuckle. All right, Evelyn. I'll look into it. But I want you to understand something. Once we start down this road, there's no going back. If we find proof that your daughter tried to kill you, that knowledge is going to change everything. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Tyler's terrified face, about the 6 people who were still recovering in the hospital, about the cold calculation in Marissa's voice when she'd tried to pressure me into drinking that champagne. Yes, I said. I'm prepared. I wasn't, of course. No one could be prepared for what Cole was going to discover, or for what I was going to have to do with that information. But I was committed. Marissa had made her choice when she decided I had to die. Now, I was going to make mine. The layers are peeling back, aren't they? What started as family dysfunction has revealed itself as something much more sinister. Evelyn's decision to involve Cole is going to change everything, but is she prepared for how dark this rabbit hole goes? The inheritance battle explains the motive, but the calculated cruelty of poisoning 6 innocent people shows just how far Marissa was willing to go. If you're thinking about your own family dynamics right now, you're not alone. Drop a comment about how money has affected your family relationships. These stories remind us that greed can poison even the closest bonds. Cole Davidson hadn't changed much in the 20 years since I'd last seen him. His hair was gray now instead of black, and his face carried more lines, but he still had the same sharp eyes and careful movements that had made him both valuable and dangerous in his younger days. We met at a small diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where the coffee was strong, the conversations were quiet, and nobody paid attention to other people's business. Cole was already seated in a corner booth when I arrived, his back to the wall and his eyes on the door. Old habits from a lifetime of careful living. You look good, Evelyn, he said as I slid into the seat across from him. Considering the circumstances. Thank you. I wish I could say the same about the circumstances. A waitress appeared with coffee and took our orders, scrambled eggs for me, a burger for Cole. Neither of us was really interested in the food, but ordering gave us a reason to be there and a natural pause in conversation if anyone got too curious about our discussion. I've been thinking about what you told me on the phone, Cole said once the waitress was out of earshot. If you're right about your daughter, this is more sophisticated than your average family dispute. Poisoning multiple people to cover one specific target? That takes planning, knowledge, and access to materials that aren't exactly available at the local pharmacy. I wrapped my hands around my coffee mug, using the warmth to steady my nerves. What are you saying? I'm saying this wasn't her first rodeo. People don't go from zero to mass poisoning without some kind of escalation. If Marissa did this, she's probably done other things. Smaller things. Testing the waters, maybe, or dealing with other obstacles in her life. The thought made my stomach turn. Other people? Could be. Or it could be threats, intimidation, sabotage. There are a lot of ways to hurt people that don't leave bodies behind. Cole leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping even lower. I need you to think, Evelyn. Has anything happened to people in Marissa's life over the past few years? Anyone who crossed her, competed with her, stood in her way? Anyone who had accidents, got sick unexpectedly, lost opportunities in ways that seemed suspicious. I thought about it, running through my limited knowledge of Marissa's recent life. We hadn't been close enough for me to know the details of her daily existence, but there had been mentions of various conflicts and frustrations over the years. There was something with her job, I said slowly. About 2 years ago, she was up for a promotion. She was convinced she was going to get it, talked about it for months. Then suddenly, her supervisor, the woman who would have made the decision, got very sick. Some kind of sudden onset illness that lasted for weeks. Marissa ended up getting the promotion when the woman had to take extended medical leave. Cole made a note in a small notebook he'd pulled from his jacket pocket. What kind of illness? I'm not sure. Marissa just said it was stress-related, something about the woman working too hard and having a breakdown. But now that I think about it, I paused, remembering the conversation. Marissa seemed almost pleased about it. Not sympathetic the way you'd expect someone to be about a colleague's illness. More like satisfied. Anyone else? I thought harder, trying to recall conversations from family gatherings and phone calls. Her neighbor. There was an issue about property lines or something. The woman was claiming that Marissa's new fence was on her land, threatening to sue. This was maybe 18 months ago. Then the woman's dog died suddenly, some kind of poisoning, they thought. The woman was so distraught she ended up selling her house and moving away. Cole's pen moved across the notebook page. Convenient timing. You think Marissa? I think we need to look into these incidents more carefully. If there's a pattern, it'll help establish that the birthday party wasn't an isolated event. He closed the notebook and looked at me directly. But first, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. I nodded. Do you want justice, or do you want revenge? The question caught me off guard. What's the difference? Justice is taking evidence to the police and letting the system handle it. Revenge is handling it yourself in ways that ensure your daughter gets exactly what she deserves, regardless of what the law says about it. Cole's eyes were steady, unflinching. Both are options, but they require different approaches and different levels of commitment. I thought about Tyler's terrified face, about 6 people fighting for their lives in hospital beds, about the cold calculation it took to poison innocent strangers to cover up an attempted murder. I thought about years of resentment and legal battles and the daughter who had decided that her inheritance was worth more than her mother's life. I wanted to pay, I said quietly. Really pay. Not just a slap on the wrist from a legal system that might not even be able to prove what she did. Cole nodded as if my answer was exactly what he'd expected. All right then. We do this my way with my rules. First rule, you tell no one about this conversation or any future conversations we have. No one. Not your sister, not your son, not even Tyler. The fewer people who know, the safer everyone is. I understand. Second rule. You follow my lead on this. I know you're angry, I know you want immediate action, but we move carefully, and we move smart. Rushing gets people caught or killed, and I'm too old for either. Okay. Third rule. Once we start, we finish. No changing your mind halfway through, no attacks of conscience, no deciding you want to forgive and forget. If we do this, we do it all the way. I looked at this man who had been willing to walk away from a lucrative partnership with my husband because he couldn't stomach Robert's moral standards. A man who had spent the last 20 years operating in the shadows, solving problems that decent people couldn't or wouldn't handle themselves. I understand, I said. When do we start? We already have, Cole said with a thin smile. I've been making some calls since you contacted me yesterday. The hospital where the poisoning victims are being treated? I have a contact there. Someone who can get me copies of blood tests, toxicology reports, medical records.
How?
Better you don't know. But by tomorrow night, I'll know exactly what substance your daughter used to poison those people. Once I have that information, I can start tracing where she got it and how she learned to use it. Our food arrived, and we ate in silence for a few minutes. I found myself studying Cole's face, wondering what kinds of things he'd done over the past 20 years, what kinds of problems he'd solved for people who couldn't solve them legally. "Can I ask you something?" I said finally. "Shoot. Why are you helping me? This can't be your usual type of case." Cole set down his fork and looked at me thoughtfully. "You want the truth? Your husband was a good man. One of the few truly good men I've known in my life. When he found out about some of the corners I was cutting in our business, he could have turned me in to the authorities. Instead, he just walked away, gave me a chance to make a clean break and start over. Robert never told me about that.
He wouldn't have.
It wasn't his way to hold people's mistakes over them." Cole picked up his coffee cup. "I always respected him for that. And I respected the way he talked about you and his kids. Family meant everything to him. It meant everything to me, too. I know. That's why this is so personal for you. Someone violated the most sacred bond there is, the bond between parent and child. In my book, that deserves a response that's just as personal." After we finished eating, Cole walked me to my car. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few truckers and late shift workers grabbing meals before heading home. "I'll call you tomorrow night," he said. "Don't call me unless it's an emergency. And Evelyn, be careful around your daughter. Don't do anything that might make her suspicious. Act normal, whatever normal is for your relationship. What if she tries to contact me? What if she wants to get together again? You make excuses. You're feeling under the weather, you're busy with some project, whatever. Just stay away from her until we know more about what we're dealing with." I drove home through the quiet streets of my neighborhood, past houses where normal families were settling in for the evening. Families where mothers and daughters called each other to share gossip and plan shopping trips. Families where birthday parties ended with hugs and laughter instead of ambulances and police reports. I envied them their innocence, their ability to trust in the basic goodness of the people they loved. That trust had been shattered for me, and I knew it would never be fully restored. But as I pulled into my driveway and looked at my small, safe house, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Tyler's warning at the party. Hope. Not the hope of reconciliation or forgiveness, but the hope of justice. The hope that Marissa would finally face consequences for her actions. The hope that my grandson would be safe. Inside my house, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my living room, surrounded by photos of happier times. Pictures of Marissa as a child, smiling and innocent. Pictures of family vacations and Christmas mornings and graduation days. Pictures of a life that seemed like it belonged to someone else. Tomorrow, Cole would begin his investigation in earnest. Tomorrow, I would start learning the truth about who my daughter had become and what she was capable of. Tomorrow, the quiet phase of this war would begin. But tonight, I was just a mother sitting alone in her house, mourning the loss of a daughter who was still alive but was no longer the person I had raised and loved. Tonight, I was saying goodbye to the last of my illusions about family and love and the people we think we know. Tonight, I was preparing for battle. Cole's involvement changes everything, doesn't it? This isn't just about family drama anymore. This is about a professional investigation into what might be a serial pattern of violence. The casual way he talks about revenge versus justice tells us that Evelyn is stepping into a much darker world than she ever imagined. And his revelation about other potential victims? That suggests Marissa's poisoning spree at the birthday party wasn't her first attempt at eliminating obstacles in her life. Share this chapter if you're starting to see your own family dynamics in a new light. Sometimes the people we think we know are strangers, wearing familiar faces. Cole called me the next evening, just as he'd promised. I'd spent the entire day trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy, grocery shopping, cleaning house, returning phone calls from concerned friends who'd heard about the poisoning at the party. But underneath the routine activities, my nerves were stretched tight as piano wire. "We need to meet," Cole said without preamble when I answered the phone. "Tonight." "Same place as yesterday, but later. Say 10 o'clock. "Did you find something?" "I found a lot of things."
10 o'clock, Evelyn.
"And come alone." The diner was nearly empty when I arrived, just a few late-shift workers and one couple sharing dessert in a corner booth. Cole was in the same spot as before, but his expression was grimmer than it had been 24 hours earlier. "Tell me," I said as soon as I sat down. He slid a manila folder across the table. "Medical records from the hospital. Don't ask me how I got them, and don't ever mention that you've seen them." I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were photocopied pages of lab results, doctor's notes, and toxicology reports. Most of the medical terminology was beyond me, but Cole had highlighted certain sections in yellow marker. "They were all poisoned with the same substance," he said quietly. "A compound called ricin. It's derived from castor beans, and it's extremely toxic. Even small amounts can be fatal, especially for older adults or people with compromised immune systems." I stared at the papers, trying to process what I was reading. How would Marissa get something like that? That's where it gets interesting. Ricin isn't something you can just buy at the pharmacy. It requires knowledge of chemistry and access to specific materials. Either your daughter has skills she's never revealed, or she had help from someone who does. "Help." Cole leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. "I made some other calls today. Checked with contacts I have in various communities. Turns out there's been chatter recently about someone in this area looking for a freelancer. Someone willing to provide specialized services for the right price." My blood turned to ice. "You mean a hitman, Evelyn? Your daughter wasn't just planning to poison you. She hired backup." The diner suddenly felt too warm, too bright, too exposed. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without having been in the room when the deal was made. But it explains a lot. The ricin in the champagne was planned and make it look like you died from the same food poisoning that affected the others. But if that failed, if you didn't drink enough to kill you, or if you survived the initial poisoning, there was Plan B." "Which was?" Cole reached into his jacket and pulled out a second folder, this one thinner than the first. "I did some checking on the entertainment at the party. Your daughter hired a magician for the kids, right?" I nodded, remembering the man in the colorful costume who'd been setting up his equipment when I arrived at the party. "His name is Marcus Webb. He's got a record, nothing violent, just some petty theft and con artist stuff. Small-time grifter who makes money doing kids' parties and street performances." Cole opened the second folder. "But here's the interesting part. Webb was hired for your daughter's party at the last minute. The original entertainer canceled 2 days before the event, and Webb got the gig through a referral from someone who wouldn't give their real name. You think he was the backup plan?" "I know he was. I had a conversation with Mr. Webb this afternoon. Very persuasive conversation." Cole's smile was cold and sharp. "Turns out he was paid $5,000, much more than his usual fee, to do more than just magic tricks. He was supposed to keep an eye on you during the party, and if you didn't get sick like the others, he was supposed to follow you when you left." The memory of Tyler's panicked warning took on new dimensions. My grandson hadn't just saved me from poisoning, he'd saved me from being murdered by a hired killer. What was he supposed to do? I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. "Make it look like a robbery gone wrong. Follow you home, break in, kill you, and take enough valuables to make it look like a burglary. Your daughter would have had the perfect alibi. She was at her own birthday party with dozens of witnesses." I thought about driving home that night, about the feeling that I was being watched, the way I double-checked all my locks. Those instincts had been trying to warn me about a very real danger. But I left early, before anyone got sick. So, he didn't follow me. He followed you, Cole said grimly. But he lost you when you took that detour through the industrial district on your way home.
Remember doing that?
I did remember. I'd been feeling anxious and unsettled, so I'd taken a longer route home, winding through some back streets to give myself time to think. At the time, it had seemed like a random decision. He spent 2 hours driving around your neighborhood looking for your house. By the time he found it, you'd already been home for over an hour with all your lights off. He decided it was too risky to break in when he couldn't be sure you were asleep. So he just gave up? He called your daughter to ask what he should do. She told him to abort the mission. Too many variables had changed. Too much risk of getting caught. Cole closed the folder. Lucky for you, your daughter is smart enough to know when a plan has fallen apart. I sat in silence for several minutes, trying to absorb the full scope of what I'd learned. Marissa hadn't just wanted me dead. She'd orchestrated an elaborate murder plot involving poison, hired killers, and multiple backup plans. The level of calculation and planning was staggering. There's more, Cole said, interrupting my thoughts. More. I told you yesterday that this probably wasn't your daughter's first time. I was right. He pulled out a third folder, this one considerably thicker. I spent today looking into those incidents you mentioned, her boss's mysterious illness, the neighbor's dead dog, plus a few other interesting events in your daughter's recent history. What did you find? A pattern. Over the past 3 years, at least 5 people who've had conflicts with your daughter have experienced serious problems. Her supervisor, who got sick? Turns out it wasn't stress-related. She was slowly being poisoned with small doses of arsenic, probably added to her coffee over a period of weeks. My hand flew to my mouth. How do you know that? Because I have a friend at the lab that processed her blood work. Arsenic poisoning was suspected, but they couldn't prove it wasn't accidental exposure. Could have been old paint, contaminated water, any number of sources. But the timing was awfully convenient for your daughter's career advancement. And the neighbor's dog? Antifreeze in its water bowl. Classic method. Sweet taste attracts animals, but it's highly toxic. The neighbor was so traumatized by her pet's death that she moved away within a month, dropping her property line lawsuit. Cole opened the thick folder and spread out several pages of notes and photocopied documents. There's also a coworker who was competing with your daughter for a client. The woman's car brakes failed on the highway, nearly killed her. Automotive investigation found evidence of tampering, but no leads on who did it. And you think Marissa? I think your daughter has been systematically eliminating obstacles in her life for years. People who threatened her job, her property, her plans. She's gotten very good at making problems disappear. I stared at the documentation spread across the table, feeling sick. This wasn't just about money or inheritance anymore. This was about a woman who had turned murder into a regular solution for life's inconveniences. There's one more thing, Cole said quietly. The big one. He pulled out a final document, a death certificate. The name on it made my heart stop. Robert Mitchell, Marissa's father-in-law. Rick's father. He died 2 years ago, Cole said. Heart attack, according to the official cause of death. But look at the timing. I looked at the date on the certificate. It was just 3 weeks after Robert Mitchell had told Rick and Marissa that he was changing his will to leave less money to them and more to charity. I looked at the date on the certificate. It was just 3 weeks after Robert Mitchell had told Rick and Marissa that he was changing his will to leave less money to them and more to charity. Marissa was at his house the day he died, Cole continued, making him lunch, taking care of him while Rick was at work. She called the ambulance herself when she found him collapsed in his study. You think she killed her father-in-law? I think she's been killing anyone who stands between her and the money she believes she deserves. Her supervisor, her neighbor, her father-in-law, and now you. The only difference is that with you, she got sloppy. She involved too many people, used too elaborate a plan, and she didn't account for her son's ability to overhear conversations. I leaned back in the booth, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Cole had uncovered. My daughter wasn't just a would-be killer. She was a serial killer who had been operating for years without anyone suspecting. "What do we do now?" I asked. Cole gathered up the folders and put them back in his briefcase. "Now we decide how to stop her. The question is, do you want her in prison or do you want her dead?" The directness of the question shocked me. "Cole, I'm serious, Evelyn. The evidence I've gathered isn't admissible in court. Most of it was obtained through illegal means. Even if we could get the police to take it seriously, Marissa is smart enough to have covered her tracks. She'd probably beat the charges and walk free. But if she's killed all these people, she'll keep killing. You, Tyler, if he becomes a threat, anyone else who gets in her way. That's what serial killers do. They escalate. The only way to stop them permanently is to eliminate them." I thought about Tyler, about the fear in his eyes when he'd warned me to leave the party. I thought about the 6 innocent people who'd been poisoned to cover up my murder. I thought about all the victims Cole had identified, people whose only crime was being inconvenient to my daughter's plans. "If she dies," I said slowly, "Tyler is safe?" Tyler is safe, the community is safe, and justice is served for all her victims, past, present, and future. I made my decision. What do we need to do? The scope of Marissa's crimes is staggering, isn't it? This isn't just about a daughter who wanted her inheritance early. This is about a calculating serial killer who has been murdering people for years. The revelation about Rick's father, about the supervisor and the neighbor, paints a picture of someone who sees murder as just another problem-solving tool. And now Evelyn has to make the hardest decision of her life: seek justice through the law that might fail, or take justice into her own hands. What would you do if you discovered your own family member was a serial killer? The comments are exploding with opinions, and I can see this story is forcing all of us to examine our own moral boundaries. Planning a murder, I discovered, was surprisingly mundane work. It involved spreadsheets and timelines, careful observation of routines, and endless consideration of variables that could go wrong. It was like planning any other complex project, except the stakes were life and death. Cole and I met 3 more times over the next 2 weeks, always at different locations, always with the careful paranoia of people who understood that one mistake could destroy everything. We developed what he called the framework, a plan that would remove Marissa from the world while protecting Tyler and ensuring that no suspicion would fall on either of us. The key, Cole explained, was patience and misdirection. "Your daughter thinks she's the only one playing chess," he said during one of our meetings. "She's been moving pieces around the board for years, eliminating threats, securing advantages. But she's about to discover that she's not the only player in the game." The first phase of our plan involved what Cole called destabilization. We needed to create chaos in Marissa's life, to make her feel vulnerable and desperate. Desperate people made mistakes, and mistakes created opportunities. "She's gotten away with murder because she's been careful and methodical," Cole explained. "But if we can make her feel like her world is falling apart, she'll start taking risks. And risks create openings." We started with her finances. Cole had contacts in various industries: banking, credit reporting, insurance, people who could make life difficult for someone without leaving obvious fingerprints. Within a week, Marissa began experiencing a series of seemingly unrelated problems. Her credit cards were inexplicably canceled due to suspicious activity. Her homeowner's insurance was dropped because of routine policy review that revealed supposed issues with her coverage. Her mortgage company initiated an audit of her loan documentation, claiming they'd received an anonymous tip about possible fraud during the application process. None of these problems were insurmountable individually, but together they created the kind of stress that makes people lose sleep and make poor decisions. I watched from a distance as the pressure mounted. Marissa called me twice during that first week, something that hadn't happened in months, ostensibly to chat, but really to probe for information about my own financial situation. "Mom, have you had any problems with your bank lately?" she asked during the second call. "I've been having the strangest issues with my accounts." "No, dear. Everything's been normal for me." "What kind of problems?" "Oh, just some confusion about transactions and credit reports." "Probably nothing, but it's been frustrating." There was a pause. I've been thinking about what we talked about after Dad's funeral, about how his will was structured. Here it was, the real reason for her call. "What about it, sweetheart?" "I just think, well, you're getting older and managing that much money must be stressful for you. Have you thought about maybe distributing some of it now while you're still alive? It might be easier for everyone." The audacity was breathtaking. Even while dealing with her own manufactured financial crisis, Marissa was still focused on getting her hands on my inheritance. The money that she'd already tried to kill me for. "I haven't really thought about it," I lied. "My financial advisor says I should keep things as they are for now." "Well, maybe you could get a second opinion. I'd be happy to help you find someone who could review your situation. Someone she could control, no doubt. Someone who would recommend exactly the kind of wealth redistribution she'd been demanding for years." "That's very thoughtful of you, dear. I'll consider it." After I hung up, I called Cole to report the conversation. "Good," he said. "The pressure's working. She's starting to feel vulnerable, and vulnerable people reach for familiar solutions. She's going back to the inheritance issue because that's her ultimate goal." "How long before we move to the next phase?"
Soon.
"But first, I need you to do something that's going to be very difficult." "What?" "I need you to reconcile with her. Publicly and convincingly." The idea made my stomach turn. "Cole, I can't. After everything I know about what she's done." "You have to. The plan only works if she trusts you enough to get close. Right now, she sees you as an obstacle to be eliminated. We need her to see you as an ally to be manipulated." "How do I do that?" "You give her what she's been asking for. Or at least, you make her think you are." Cole outlined his strategy. "I would contact Marissa and tell her I'd been reconsidering our relationship, that I was tired of the distance between us and wanted to rebuild our bond. I would suggest that we spend more time together, maybe take a trip somewhere, just the two of us. Mother-daughter bonding time. But what about the money? She's going to expect me to address the inheritance issue." "You will." "You'll tell her you've been talking to financial advisors, that you're considering restructuring your estate planning. You don't commit to anything specific, but you give her hope that she's finally going to get what she wants. And then we arrange a situation where she feels safe enough to try again. Somewhere private, where she thinks she can kill you without witnesses or complications. Somewhere we can control all the variables." The thought of deliberately putting myself in my daughter's crosshairs was terrifying. But I thought about Tyler, about all the people Marissa had already killed, about all the future victims who would die if we didn't stop her. What about Tyler? How do we make sure he's safe during all this? That's part of the plan. We arrange for him to be somewhere else when it happens. Summer camp, visiting relatives, somewhere with plenty of witnesses, and an unshakable alibi. I spent 3 days gathering my courage before I called Marissa. When I finally dialed her number, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone.
Sua?
"I hope I'm not calling at a bad time."
Mom.
"No, it's fine. I was just dealing with some paperwork. How are you?"
I'm okay.
"Actually, I was hoping we could get together soon. I've been doing a lot of thinking since your birthday party, and I realize how distant we've become. I miss you, Marissa. I miss my daughter." There was a pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she tried to figure out what angle I was working. "I miss you too, Mom. I'd love to spend more time together. I was thinking maybe we could take a little trip somewhere. Just the two of us. We haven't done anything like that since you were a teenager." That sounds wonderful. Did you have somewhere specific in mind? Well, I've been looking at some rental properties online. There's a beautiful cabin up at Lake Morrison that's available next month. Very private, very peaceful. We could just relax and catch up on each other's lives. Lake Morrison was Cole's suggestion. It was remote enough to ensure privacy, but accessible enough that we could control who came and went. More importantly, it was the kind of place where accidents could happen to older women who might slip and fall, or have heart attacks brought on by stress and isolation. That sounds perfect, Marissa said, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. When were you thinking? The first weekend in November? Tyler would be at his scout camping trip, so you wouldn't have to worry about arrangements for him. Another of Cole's suggestions. Tyler's scout troop had a camping trip planned for that weekend, plenty of adult supervision and witnesses to establish that he was nowhere near whatever was going to happen at the lake. November sounds great. Mom, I have to say, I'm really happy you called. I know things have been strained between us, and I'd like to fix that. So would I, sweetheart. Life's too short for family conflicts. It really is. And actually, since we're talking about fixing things, I've been having some financial difficulties lately. Nothing serious, but it's made me think about the future, about security for families like ours. Here it was. The opening she'd been waiting for. What kind of difficulties? Oh, just some confusion with banks and insurance companies. Probably just bureaucratic nonsense, but it's been stressful. It's made me realize how vulnerable we all are to circumstances beyond our control. I'm sorry you're dealing with that, dear. It's fine, but it has made me think about our conversation after Dad's funeral, about estate planning and making sure families are taken care of. I took a deep breath. This was the moment when I had to convince my daughter that she was finally going to get what she'd been willing to kill for. Actually, I've been thinking about that too. I've been talking to some financial advisors about restructuring my will. You and Daniel are my only children, and I want to make sure you're both secure. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. When Marissa finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. That's wonderful to hear, Mom. I know it's not easy to think about these things. It's not. But I'm not getting any younger, and I want to make sure my affairs are in order. Maybe we can talk more about it when we're at the lake. Away from distractions. I'd like that very much. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet house and tried not to think about what I had just set in motion. In 3 weeks, I would be alone in a remote cabin with a woman who had already tried to kill me once and who now believed she was finally going to get everything she'd ever wanted. The only question was whether Cole and I were smart enough, careful enough, and ruthless enough to make sure that she was the one who didn't come home. The manipulation is chilling, isn't it? Watching Evelyn deliberately walk into the spider's web, knowing that her daughter is already planning how to kill her. The destabilization phase shows just how many ways there are to destroy someone's life without them ever knowing who's pulling the strings. And now we're heading toward the final confrontation, a remote cabin where only one woman will emerge alive. The comments are split between admiration for Evelyn's courage and horror at what she's planning to do. But when you're dealing with a serial killer who happens to be your own child, what choice do you really have? The 3 weeks between my phone call with Marissa and our planned trip to Lake Morrison passed with agonizing slowness. Every day felt like walking a tightrope, maintaining the facade of a mother excited about reconciling with her daughter, while secretly preparing for what might be my final confrontation with the child I had brought into this world. Cole and I met every few days to refine our plan and monitor Marissa's increasingly desperate situation. The financial pressure we'd created was working exactly as intended. Her credit problems had cascaded into larger issues, and she was starting to make the kind of reckless decisions that desperate people make when they feel cornered. She tried to take out a cash advance on her remaining credit card yesterday, Cole reported during one of our meetings. $5,000. The bank flagged it as suspicious activity and froze her account pending investigation. How do you know all this? I have friends in the banking industry. The same friends who helped create her problems in the first place. Cole's smile was cold. Your daughter is starting to understand what it feels like when your financial world collapses around you. But the financial pressure was just the beginning. Cole had also been working other angles, creating problems in different areas of Marissa's life that would make her feel increasingly isolated and vulnerable. Her insurance company, prompted by an anonymous tip, had launched an investigation into possible fraud related to her father-in-law's death. They weren't accusing her of murder, but they were questioning whether she had misrepresented her relationship to the deceased when filing his life insurance claim. The health department had received a complaint about the catering company that had provided food for her birthday party, leading to an investigation that was causing problems for her reputation in the community. People were beginning to whisper about the party that had sent 6 people to the hospital. Even her job was becoming unstable. Someone had sent anonymous letters to her supervisor suggesting that her recent promotion had been obtained through unethical means, possibly including sabotage of her predecessor's health. None of these problems would have been enough to destroy Marissa's life individually, but together they were creating the kind of all-encompassing stress that makes people desperate enough to take huge risks. The beautiful thing about this approach, Cole explained, is that she can't fight back against an enemy she can identify. All these problems seem random, unconnected. She doesn't know who to blame or how to stop what's happening to her. I understood the strategy, but watching it unfold made me deeply uncomfortable. Despite everything Marissa had done, despite all the people she had killed, she was still my daughter. Seeing her world systematically destroyed felt like watching a building collapse in slow motion. But then I would remember Tyler's terrified face, or think about the 6 innocent people who had nearly died at her birthday party, and my resolve would harden again. During the second week of our campaign, Marissa called me more frequently than she had in years. At first, the calls seemed casual, just a daughter checking in with her mother, but I could hear the strain in her voice, the barely controlled panic of someone whose life was spiraling out of control. Mom, you haven't been having any problems with your credit cards or bank accounts, have you? She asked during one particularly telling conversation. No, dear. Everything's been normal. Why do you ask? I'm just dealing with some irritating issues. Identity theft, maybe, or some kind of computer error. It's probably nothing, but it's been frustrating. That sounds awful. Is there anything I can do to help? Actually, she paused, and I could hear her taking a deep breath. Actually, there is something. I know this might seem sudden, but I'm wondering if you've given any more thought to what we discussed about restructuring your estate planning.
Here it was.
The desperation was driving her to be more direct than she'd ever been before. I have been thinking about it, I said carefully. In fact, I've scheduled some meetings with financial advisors for next month. I want to make sure I understand all my options. That's great. Really great. And Mom, I hope you'll consider. Well, I hope you'll remember that Daniel and I are both at stages in our lives where financial security would make a huge difference. Unlike when we were younger, we have real responsibilities now. Mortgages, children's education, planning for our own retirements. The entitlement in her voice was staggering. Even while her own life was falling apart, she was still focused on getting her hands on my money. It confirmed everything Cole and I suspected about her motivations. Of course, sweetheart. You and Daniel are my priorities. Thank you. I can't tell you how much it means to hear you say that. After that conversation, I knew we had her exactly where we wanted her. The combination of financial pressure and the promise of finally getting her inheritance was making her desperate enough to take the kind of risk we needed her to take. The third week brought the piece of information that Cole had been waiting for. She's been making inquiries, he told me during our final planning meeting, reaching out to her old contacts, looking for the same kind of specialized help she used for the birthday party. My blood ran cold. You mean she's trying to hire another hitman? Someone to provide backup for whatever she's planning to do to you at the lake. But I thought the whole point was to make it look like an accident. It is. But your daughter has learned from her mistakes. She had backup at the birthday party in case the poisoning didn't work. She's not going to make the mistake of relying on just one method again. Cole opened his briefcase and pulled out a photograph. It showed a man in his 30s, thin and wiry with dead eyes and tattoos covering his forearms. This is Danny Kowalski. Low-level enforcer, does wet work for anyone willing to pay his price. Your daughter contacted him 3 days ago. What did she hire him to do? She wants him to follow us to the lake, wait until she's had a chance to try her primary plan, and then come in to clean up if necessary. Make it look like a burglary gone wrong, maybe a random attack by some drifter. I stared at the photograph, trying to process the fact that my daughter had hired this dangerous-looking man to help murder me. How do you know all this? Because Danny Kowalski has been working for me for the past 5 years, Cole said with a grim smile. He's going to take your daughter's money and then report back to me on everything she tells him. The web of deception was becoming so complex that I was having trouble keeping track of all the players. But Cole seemed to have considered every angle, every possibility. So, what happens at the lake? Your daughter will try to kill you, probably using poison again since that's her preferred method. When that fails, she'll signal for Kowalski to come in and finish the job. But instead of killing you, he'll restrain her while you and I have a conversation with her about all the people she's murdered. And then, Cole's expression was completely flat, emotionless. Then we give her a choice. She can take the same poison she intended to use on you, or we can turn all our evidence over to the police and let her spend the rest of her life in prison while we make sure Tyler knows exactly what kind of monster his mother really is. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Marissa would be confronted with proof of all her crimes, given a choice between a quick death and a long imprisonment that would destroy her son's life, and we would have justice for all her victims. What if she chooses prison? She won't. Your daughter's entire identity is built around being respected, being seen as successful and virtuous. The thought of being exposed as a serial killer, of having Tyler grow up knowing what she really is, will be unbearable to her. And if she tries to fight or run, that's what Kowalski is for. He'll make sure she doesn't leave that cabin until the matter is resolved one way or another. I spent the final week before our trip trying to maintain the facade of excited anticipation while internally preparing for what might be the most dangerous weekend of my life. I bought new clothes for the trip, researched restaurants in the area where we could have dinner, even picked up some board games we could play together. All the while knowing that my daughter was planning to kill me and that I was planning to kill her first. 2 days before we were scheduled to leave, Tyler called me. It was the first time I'd spoken to him since the morning after the birthday party, and hearing his voice made my chest tight with emotion.
Grandma.
Mom said you guys are going on a trip this weekend. We are, sweetheart. Just a little mother-daughter getaway to a cabin by the lake. That sounds nice. He paused, and I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Grandma, are you going to be okay? The question caught me off guard. Of course I'm going to be okay. Why would you ask that? I don't know. I have a bad feeling about Mom lately. Like she's planning something. Out of the mouths of babes. This child's intuition had already saved my life once, and now it was picking up on the dangerous undercurrents in his mother's behavior again. Tyler, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You're going on your camping trip this weekend, right? Yes. I want you to stay with your scout leaders the entire time. Don't wander off alone. Don't go anywhere without telling an adult where you're going.
Can you promise me that?
Okay. But Grandma, what about you? What if Mom tries to hurt you again? The fact that this 11-year-old was still worrying about my safety, still trying to protect me from his own mother, broke my heart. I'm going to be very careful, sweetheart. And Tyler, if anything happens to me, I want you to know that I love you more than anything in the world. You're the best grandson anyone could ask for. I love you too, Grandma. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and cried for the first time since this whole nightmare had begun. Not for myself, not for Marissa, but for Tyler. For the innocence he'd already lost, and for the horrible truth he would have to live with for the rest of his life. No matter how this weekend ended, Tyler would grow up knowing that his mother was a killer and that his grandmother had been forced to stop her. That knowledge would shape him in ways I couldn't begin to imagine. But keeping him alive and safe was more important than preserving his innocence. Some truths were too dangerous to hide, even from children. The night before we left for the lake, I packed my bag with the same care I would have used for any other trip. Comfortable clothes, toiletries, the murder mystery novel I'd been reading, all the normal accoutrements of a weekend getaway. I also packed the small recording device Cole had given me, designed to capture any confessions Marissa might make before we confronted her. And hidden in the lining of my suitcase was a vial of the same ricin compound she had used on her previous victims. Justice, I had learned, sometimes required using the enemy's own weapons against them. Tomorrow, one way or another, this would all be over. This psychological warfare is devastating, isn't it? Watching Marissa's world crumble while she becomes more desperate and dangerous is like watching a wounded animal backed into a corner. And Tyler's phone call, that child's intuition is still trying to protect his grandmother even as he struggles to understand the monster his mother has become. Tomorrow, everything comes to a head at Lake Morrison. Are you ready for the final confrontation? Because what happens next will test every assumption about justice, family, and how far a person will go to protect the ones they love. The drive to Lake Morrison took 2.5 hours through increasingly remote countryside. Marissa picked me up at 9 a.m. sharp, her car loaded with groceries and weekend supplies, playing the role of excited daughter to perfection. I can't remember the last time we did something like this, she said as we pulled out of my driveway. Just the two of us, no distractions, no other family obligations. It's been too long, I agreed, settling into the passenger seat with my purse carefully positioned to ensure the recording device inside would capture our conversation. She looked beautiful that morning. My daughter always had been stunning, with the kind of classic features that photographed well and made people trust her instinctively. She was wearing jeans and a soft blue sweater that brought out her eyes, her dark hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. She looked like exactly what she was pretending to be, a successful, loving daughter taking her mother on a weekend retreat. No one looking at us would have suspected that we were both planning to commit murder. So tell me about these financial advisors you've been talking to, Marissa said once we were on the highway. I'm really glad you're being proactive about estate planning. Well, I've scheduled meetings with 3 different firms. I want to get multiple perspectives before I make any major decisions. That's smart. And are you considering? Have you thought about maybe transferring some assets now, while you're still alive? I've read that it can be more tax efficient than waiting for the will to be executed. The eagerness in her voice was palpable. She was already spending money she thought would be hers soon. It's one of the options they've mentioned. Of course, I'd want to make sure I keep enough to maintain my current lifestyle, but there might be room for some early distributions. That would be wonderful, Mom. Not just for the money, but for the peace of mind. Knowing that your affairs are in order, that Daniel and I are taken care of, it would mean so much. I watched the countryside roll past my window, farms and forests giving way to wilder, more isolated terrain. With every mile, we were moving further from help, further from witnesses, closer to the remote location where my daughter planned to kill me. Speaking of Daniel, I said, have you talked to him about any of this? A little. He's been so busy with his new job that it's hard to catch him. But he agrees that it's time to revisit Dad's estate planning. I doubted that was true. Daniel had always been uncomfortable with Marissa's obsession with the inheritance. He'd moved to California partly to escape the toxic atmosphere that had surrounded our family after Robert's death. I should probably call him before I make any final decisions. Make sure he's comfortable with whatever arrangements I make. Of course, Marissa said quickly. Though, I think you'll find he trusts your judgment. He always has. The conversation continued in that vein for most of the drive, superficially pleasant small talk with an undercurrent of calculation and greed. Marissa was playing her part perfectly, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the steering wheel just a little too tightly. She was nervous.
Good. Nervous people made mistakes.
We reached the cabin just after noon. It was exactly as advertised, a rustic but comfortable structure nestled among tall pines, with a deck overlooking the lake and no other buildings visible in any direction. The perfect place for a quiet weekend retreat. The perfect place for murder. This is beautiful, Mom, Marissa said as we carried our bags inside. How did you find this place? Online. The pictures looked lovely, and the reviews were excellent. I didn't mention that Cole had chosen this location specifically because it was isolated enough for privacy, but accessible enough for him and Kowalski to reach when the time came. The cabin was larger than it appeared from outside, with a great room that combined living and dining areas, a full kitchen, and 2 bedrooms separated by a hallway. Large windows on 3 sides provided views of the lake and surrounding forest. Why don't we get settled and then take a walk around the property? Marissa suggested. I'd love to see the lake up close. We unpacked our bags and took a tour of the cabin's amenities. Marissa seemed particularly interested in the kitchen, examining the stove, the refrigerator, the coffee maker. Planning her attack, no doubt, figuring out the best way to introduce poison into something I would consume. The walk around the property was pleasant but tense. Marissa pointed out the dock where we could sit and watch the sunset, the fire pit where we could roast marshmallows, the hiking trails that led into the forest. All the while, I could feel her studying me, evaluating my physical condition, my alertness, my susceptibility to whatever she was planning. You seem to be in great shape for your age, Mom, she said as we walked back toward the cabin. Do you still take those vitamins Dr. Patterson prescribed for you? The question seemed casual, but I recognized it for what it was: reconnaissance. She was trying to figure out what medications I might be taking, what my current health status was, how to make my death appear natural. I take a few supplements, nothing major. At my age, you have to be careful about maintaining your health. Of course. I worry about you living alone sometimes. If something happened, if you had a medical emergency, I have good neighbors. And I wear one of those medical alert devices when I'm out walking. I could see the frustration flicker across her face. She was trying to establish that I was frail and vulnerable, but I wasn't cooperating with her narrative. That afternoon, we settled into the comfortable rhythm of a mother-daughter weekend. We played cards, shared stories about family memories, and prepared dinner together in the cabin's well-equipped kitchen. All the while, Marissa was watching for her opportunity. It came during dinner preparation. I was cutting vegetables for a salad while she seasoned the chicken we planned to grill. When I turned to wash my hands at the sink, I saw her in the reflection of the window, quickly pulling a small vial from her pocket and sprinkling something over my portion of the chicken. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced myself to continue washing my hands calmly, as if I hadn't seen anything. The chicken smells wonderful, sweetheart, I said, turning back to face her. Dad always said I was a good cook, she replied, slipping the vial back into her pocket. I'm glad I inherited that from him. You inherited more than cooking skills from your father, I thought. You inherited his determination and his intelligence. Unfortunately, you chose to use those gifts for evil instead of good. We carried our dinner out to the deck to eat while watching the sunset over the lake. The setting was genuinely beautiful, golden light reflecting off the water, birds calling from the trees, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves around us. It should have been a perfect moment between a mother and daughter who were finally reconciling after years of strain. Instead, it was the last meal my daughter would ever serve to anyone. "This is delicious," I said, cutting a piece of my chicken and raising it toward my mouth.
Thank you.
I used a special seasoning blend I found at that gourmet market downtown.
Special seasoning.
That was one way to describe ricin. I brought the fork almost to my lips, then paused. "Oh, you know what? I should probably take my evening medication first. I'm supposed to take it with food, and I almost forgot." "Of course. Do you want me to get it for you?" "No, that's all right. I'll just run inside for a second." I went into the cabin and straight to the bathroom, where I flushed the poisoned chicken down the toilet and replaced it with a piece from the portion Marissa had prepared for herself. When I returned to the deck, she was sitting quietly, staring out at the lake with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Everything okay, sweetheart?"
Fine.
"Just enjoying the view." She watched as I took a bite of the clean chicken. "How does it taste?"
Perfect.
"You really outdid yourself." We finished dinner as the sun set completely, leaving us in the soft glow of the deck lights. Marissa seemed increasingly relaxed as the evening progressed, no doubt confident that the poison was working its way through my system. "I'm feeling a little tired," I said eventually. "It's been a long day." "Of course. Why don't you go get ready for bed? I'll clean up the dishes." I went inside and prepared for what I hoped would be the final act of this deadly charade. I brushed my teeth, changed into my nightgown, and took out the small device Cole had given me to signal that I was ready for the confrontation to begin. A single text message. "Now." Within minutes, I heard a car approaching the cabin, then footsteps on the deck, and voices in urgent conversation. When I emerged from my bedroom, I found Marissa standing in the great room with Danny Kowalski. She looked surprised and angry. "Mom, this is a friend of mine.
Danny."
He was in the area and stopped by to check on us." "How thoughtful," I said calmly. Though I have to say, I wasn't expecting visitors. "He was just leaving," Marissa said quickly. "Actually," said a familiar voice from the doorway, "I think he should stay. We have a lot to discuss." Cole stepped into the cabin, moving with the quiet confidence of a man who is completely in control of the situation. Marissa's face went white. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" "I'm here to have a conversation with you about the people you've killed," Cole said simply. "Starting with the 6 you poisoned at your birthday party, and ending with the woman you tried to poison tonight." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Marissa lunged toward the kitchen, probably going for a knife or her cell phone. Kowalski caught her arm and twisted it behind her back, not roughly, but with unmistakable authority. "I wouldn't do that, Ms. Mitchell. This conversation is going to happen whether you cooperate or not. But it'll be a lot more pleasant for everyone if you don't fight it." Marissa looked from Kowalski to Cole to me, and I saw the exact moment when she realized that everything she thought she knew about this weekend had been a lie. "Mom," her voice was small, confused, like a child who couldn't understand why she was being punished. "Sit down, Marissa," I said gently. "We need to talk about what you've done. All of it. The moment of truth has arrived, and the tables have completely turned." Marissa thought she was the hunter, but she was actually the prey all along. The poisoned chicken, the backup hitman who works for the other side, the mother who knew exactly what was happening every step of the way. It's a masterclass in manipulation and counter-manipulation. But now comes the hardest part, the confrontation between a mother and daughter, where all the masks finally come off. Are you ready to see what happens when a serial killer realizes she's been outplayed by her intended victim? Marissa sank into one of the cabin's leather armchairs, her face cycling through a series of expressions: confusion, fear, anger, and finally, a cold calculation that reminded me uncomfortably of myself. "I don't know what you think you know," she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances, but you're making a serious mistake. Cole pulled out a thick manila folder and set it on the coffee table between us. Let's start with Robert Mitchell, your father-in-law. Heart attack, very convenient timing, just 3 weeks after he told your husband he was changing his will. People have heart attacks, especially older men with high blood pressure and stress.
True.
But people don't usually have heart attacks after ingesting Digitalis unless they're already taking it for heart condition. And Robert Mitchell wasn't taking any heart medication. Marissa's composure flickered for just a moment. I don't know what you're talking about. Cole opened the folder and pulled out a toxicology report. This is from a private lab analysis of tissue samples from your father-in-law's autopsy. Samples that were supposed to be destroyed but weren't. Digitalis levels consistent with acute poisoning, not therapeutic use. That's impossible. You can't have those samples. Can't I? Cole smiled coldly. You'd be surprised what's possible when you know the right people and have enough money to motivate them. He pulled out another document. This is a credit card record showing a purchase you made at a botanical garden gift shop 2 days before Robert's death. Foxglove plants. The natural source of Digitalis. Marissa's face had gone completely white, but she wasn't ready to surrender yet. That doesn't prove anything. I bought plants for my garden all the time. Maybe. But here's where it gets interesting. Cole pulled out a third document. This is a pharmacy record from 6 months earlier. You filled a prescription for eye drops containing Digitalis. Claimed you lost the bottle a week later and needed a replacement. I did lose it. I'm sure you did. After you extracted the Digitalis and concentrated it into a more useful form. Cole leaned forward. You've been planning and executing murders for years, Marissa. Your supervisor at work, your neighbor, your father-in-law, and now your mother. The only question is how many other people have died to make your life more convenient. For the first time since this confrontation began, Marissa looked directly at me. Mom, you can't believe this. I would never hurt you. You're my mother. The pain in her voice sounded genuine, and for a moment I felt a stab of doubt. Could we be wrong? Could there be some other explanation for all the evidence Cole had gathered? Then I remembered Tyler's terrified face, the 6 people who had nearly died at her birthday party, the cold calculation with which she had tried to poison me just hours earlier. Show her the recording, I said quietly. Cole pulled out a small digital device and pressed play. Marissa's voice filled the cabin, clear and unmistakable. It has to look like an accident, something that affects everyone, not just her. By tomorrow night, she'll be gone for good. The recording continued, playing the conversation Tyler had overheard the night before the birthday party. Marissa talking about putting something special in my champagne glass, about how my age would make the poison more effective, about how my death would look like just another casualty of accidental food poisoning. When the recording ended, the cabin was completely silent except for the gentle lapping of lake water against the shore. Tyler heard you, I said softly. Your own son heard you planning to murder me, and he saved my life by warning me to leave the party. Marissa's face crumpled. For a moment, she looked like the little girl she had once been, caught in a lie and facing the consequences of her actions. He wasn't supposed to be awake, she whispered. I thought he was asleep. It was a confession. Not a denial, not an explanation, but an admission that she had indeed been planning to kill me at her birthday party. 6 people almost died because of your plan, I continued. 6 innocent people who had never done anything to hurt you. People with families, with children who needed them. And you were willing to let them die just to cover up my murder. I didn't mean for them to get sick, Marissa said, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. I calculated the doses carefully. They were only supposed to get mildly ill, just enough to make it look like food poisoning. But you miscalculated, Cole said. Because you're not as smart as you think you are. And because you're so focused on your own goals that you don't care about collateral damage. Marissa wiped her eyes and looked up at me with something that might have been hope. Mom, I know this looks bad, but you have to understand. I was desperate. The financial problems, the stress of trying to keep our family secure. I wasn't thinking clearly. What about your supervisor at work? What about your neighbor? What about Robert Mitchell? I asked. Were you just thinking unclearly for 3 years straight? She had no answer for that. Cole pulled out another folder, this one containing photographs and documents related to all of Marissa's suspected victims. We've connected you to at least 5 murders over the past 3 years. All people who stood in the way of something you wanted. Money, promotions, property disputes. You turned murder into a solution for life's inconveniences. I never wanted to hurt anyone, Marissa said, but her voice lacked conviction. You poisoned your own mother tonight, I reminded her. You put ricin on my chicken and watched me eat it, knowing it would kill me slowly and painfully. You hired a man to kill me if the poison didn't work. I gestured toward Kowalski, who was standing silently by the door. How is that not wanting to hurt anyone? Marissa looked around the cabin as if seeing it clearly for the first time. The isolation, the lack of witnesses, the careful planning that had gone into bringing her here. She was beginning to understand that this wasn't just a confrontation, it was a trap. What do you want? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Cole and I exchanged glances. We had discussed this moment many times over the past few weeks, planning exactly what we would say and how we would handle her response. We want justice, I said. For all the people you've killed, and for all the people you would have killed if we hadn't stopped you. I'll confess. I'll go to the police and tell them everything. I'll plead guilty and accept whatever sentence they give me. No, Cole said simply. You won't. Why not? Because we both know you'll never make it to trial. You're too smart, too manipulative, too good at presenting yourself as a victim. You'll claim you were mentally ill, that you were under stress, that you didn't understand the consequences of your actions. You'll get some sympathetic psychiatrist to testify that you were temporarily insane. And even if you were convicted, I added, you'd spend the rest of your life in prison at taxpayer expense. Getting medical care, getting meals, getting visits from Tyler. Living while your victims are dead. What are you saying? Cole reached into his jacket and pulled out a small vial filled with clear liquid. This is the same ricin compound you used tonight. The same poison you've been using to kill people for years. He set the vial on the coffee table next to the folders of evidence. You have a choice, I said. You can drink this and die quietly, peacefully, the way you should have let your victims die. Or we can turn all this evidence over to the police and let Tyler spend the rest of his childhood knowing that his mother was a serial killer. Marissa stared at the vial as if it were a snake. You're asking me to kill myself. I'm asking you to take responsibility for what you've done, I said. Your victims didn't get a choice. They didn't get to say goodbye to their families or make peace with their lives. You took that away from them. But Tyler will be told that you had a heart attack. A tragic but natural death that will let him remember you as his mother instead of as a monster. He'll grieve for you, but he won't have to live with the shame and horror of knowing what you really were. Cole leaned forward. If you choose prison instead, Tyler will know everything. Every murder, every victim, every cold calculation you made. That's what he'll carry for the rest of his life. And he'll visit you in prison, I added, where you'll try to manipulate him into believing you're the victim. You'll poison his mind the same way you poisoned all those people. We won't let that happen. Marissa was crying openly now, but I could see her mind working, evaluating her options, looking for some way out of the trap we had constructed around her. There wasn't one. We had made sure of that. If I do this, she said finally, if I drink that, what happens to Tyler? Who takes care of him? Rick will raise him, I said. And I'll be there to help. Tyler will grow up knowing he's loved and protected. He'll have a chance at a normal life. And you'll never tell him the truth? Never. She picked up the vial and held it in her trembling hands. How long does it take? About 30 minutes, Cole said. It's peaceful, like going to sleep. Marissa looked around the cabin one more time, her eyes lingering on the windows that showed the dark lake beyond. Then she looked at me. I want you to know that I did love you, Mom. I know it doesn't seem like it, but I did. I know you did, sweetheart. In your own way. And I'm sorry. For all of it. For the people I hurt. For what I tried to do to you. For the daughter I never was. I'm sorry, too. I said, and I meant it. I'm sorry for the choices that brought us to this moment. Marissa uncapped the vial and lifted it toward her lips. Then she stopped. Will you stay with me? While it happens. I moved to the couch and sat beside her, taking her free hand in mine. Of course. She drank the ricin in one quick swallow, then leaned back against the couch cushions. I'm scared, Mom. I know. I'm here. We sat together in the quiet cabin, mother and daughter, while the poison I had given her began its work. She told me about Tyler's first steps, about her wedding day, about dreams she'd had as a child. Normal memories from a life that had taken such a dark turn. After 25 minutes, she closed her eyes and went to sleep. She never woke up. The end came quietly, didn't it? Not with violence or drama, but with a daughter finally accepting responsibility for her crimes and a mother staying with her child through the very last moments. The choice between prison and poison, between Tyler knowing the truth or believing a lie, was really no choice at all for someone who still had a shred of love left in her heart. Tomorrow, the cleanup begins, and Evelyn will have to learn how to live with what she's done. But tonight, justice was served in the only way it could be, privately, quietly, and completely. 3 months have passed since that night at Lake Morrison, and I've learned to live with the weight of what I did. Not the guilt. I feel no guilt for stopping a serial killer who happened to be my daughter. But the weight of knowledge, the understanding of how far a person can fall, and how much love can be twisted into something unrecognizable. The official story was simple and believable. Marissa had a sudden heart attack during our mother-daughter weekend at the lake. I called 911 immediately, performed CPR until the paramedics arrived, but there was nothing anyone could do. The medical examiner found evidence of a previously undiagnosed heart condition that made sudden cardiac death a tragic, but not unusual occurrence for someone her age. No one questioned the story. Why would they? I was the grieving mother who had lost her only daughter during what was supposed to be a healing weekend together. The insurance companies paid out her life insurance policies without hesitation. The investigation into the birthday party poisoning was quietly closed when the health department concluded it had been caused by contaminated ingredients from the catering company. Rick was devastated by Marissa's death, but he's slowly rebuilding his life. He started seeing a grief counselor and has begun dating again, a kind woman named Sarah who works at Tyler's school and understands the complexities of single parenting. Tyler has been my greatest concern through all of this. He grieved for his mother deeply, but there was something different about his grief, a quality I couldn't identify until I realized it was relief. He had been living with the terrible knowledge of what his mother was capable of, and her death had freed him from that burden. He doesn't know that I was involved in Marissa's death, and he never will. As far as Tyler is concerned, his mother died of natural causes while trying to repair her relationship with her own mother. That's the truth he'll carry for the rest of his life. We've grown closer since Marissa's death. Tyler spends most weekends with me now, and I've become more involved in his daily life. I help with homework, attend school events, and listen to his stories about friends and classes and all the normal concerns of a 12-year-old boy. Sometimes I catch him watching me with those perceptive eyes, and I wonder if he suspects that there's more to his mother's death than the official story. But if he does, he's never asked, and I've never volunteered information. Cole disappeared from my life as quietly as he had entered it. A week after Marissa's death, I received a package containing all the evidence files he had compiled, along with a note that simply said, "Justice served. Burn these. You never knew me." I followed his instructions and burned every document in my fireplace, watching years of careful investigation turn to ash. The only record of Marissa's crimes now exists in my memory, and that's where it will stay. Danny Kowalski vanished completely. I assume Cole paid him well for his cooperation and sent him somewhere far from our lives. I've never seen him again, and I hope I never do. The financial pressure campaign that had destabilized Marissa's life ended with her death. Her credit problems were resolved by the insurance payouts, and Rick was able to clear up the various investigations that had been plaguing their family. To the outside world, it looked like a series of bureaucratic mix-ups that had coincidentally resolved themselves after the tragic loss of life. I've made some changes to my own life in the aftermath. I sold my house and moved to a smaller place closer to Tyler's school so I can be more available to help Rick with parenting duties. I've also begun volunteering at a domestic violence shelter, helping women who are trying to escape dangerous situations. The work is meaningful to me in ways I couldn't have anticipated. These women understand what it's like to love someone who becomes a threat, to face impossible choices between loyalty and survival. I can't tell them my specific story, but I can offer them the kind of practical support that comes from experience with hard decisions. One evening last week, Tyler and I were sitting in my garden, working on his science project about plant biology. He was carefully labeling diagrams of flower parts while I weeded the herb I'd planted near the kitchen window. "Grandma," he said without looking up from his work, "do you ever miss Mom?" The question caught me off guard. We talked about Marissa many times since her death, but always in the context of memories and grief. This felt different, more probing. "Every day," I said honestly. "I miss the little girl she used to be, and I miss the woman I hoped she would become. But not the person she was at the end." I set down my gardening tools and looked at this wise, perceptive child who had saved my life with his courage and intuition. "Tyler, your mother was sick in ways that couldn't be cured with medicine or therapy. She made choices that hurt people, and those choices changed who she was. I loved her, but I couldn't love what she had become." He nodded as if this made perfect sense to him. "I think she was scared a lot, especially near the end. She seemed scared all the time." "What do you think she was scared of?" "Getting caught," he said simply. "I think she knew that what she was doing was wrong, but she couldn't stop herself. And she was scared that people would find out who she really was." The insight was breathtaking. This 12-year-old had understood his mother's psychology better than most trained professionals would have. "You're very perceptive, sweetheart." I had to be. Living with her, I had to pay attention to everything. Her moods, her plans, what she wasn't saying. He finally looked up at me. "I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore." "You shouldn't have had to do it in the first place. Children should feel safe with their parents, not worried about what they might do." "I felt safe with you," he said. "Even when Mom was planning bad things, I knew you would protect me if you could. If you only knew how far I went to protect you," I thought. But that was a burden he would never have to carry. "You'll always be safe with me, Tyler. Always." The inheritance that Marissa had been so desperate to claim remains largely untouched in my accounts. I've set up a trust fund for Tyler's education and future needs, and I've made arrangements for Rick to receive financial support for raising his son. The rest will go to various charities when I die, including organizations that support children who have lost parents to violence. Sometimes people ask me how I've managed to cope so well with losing my daughter. They comment on my strength, my resilience, my ability to find meaning in tragedy. If only they knew the truth, that I'm not coping with losing my daughter, but with having to kill her. The distinction is crucial. Grief for someone who dies naturally is different from the complex emotions that come with ending a life, even when that ending was necessary and just. I don't grieve for Marissa, the serial killer. I grieve for the child she once was and the potential that was lost when she chose to become a monster. But I don't regret what I did. Every time I see Tyler laugh, every time I hear about another family that's safe because Marissa isn't there to hurt them, I know that the choice was right. Some people are too dangerous to live, even when they're our own children. The hardest part isn't living with what I did. It's living with what I learned about the capacity for evil that exists in ordinary people. Marissa wasn't born a killer. She was a normal child who grew into a woman who solved problems with murder. The transformation happened gradually, one compromise at a time, until she became someone who could poison strangers to cover up killing her own mother. It makes me look at other people differently now. The pleasant neighbor, the helpful coworker, the charming family friend, any of them could be hiding the same kind of darkness that consumed my daughter. Trust, once broken by such a profound betrayal, is difficult to rebuild. The hardest part isn't living with what I did. It's living with what I learned about the capacity for evil that exists in ordinary people. Marissa wasn't born a killer. She was a normal child who grew into a woman who solved problems with murder. The transformation happened gradually, one compromise at a time, until she became someone who could poison strangers to cover up killing her own mother. It makes me look at other people differently now. The pleasant neighbor, the helpful coworker, the charming family friend, any of them could be hiding the same kind of darkness that consumed my daughter. Trust, once broken by such a profound betrayal, is difficult to rebuild. But Tyler gives me hope. Despite everything he experienced, despite growing up in a house with a serial killer, he remains fundamentally good. He's kind to animals, helpful to his friends, respectful to adults. Whatever genetic or environmental factors created Marissa's darkness didn't take root in her son. Tonight, as I finish telling you this story, I'm sitting in my living room with a cup of tea and a photo album filled with pictures of Tyler. School events, birthday parties, family gatherings, all the normal milestones of a childhood that's finally free from fear. The album also contains older photos from when Marissa was Tyler's age. Looking at them side by side, the resemblance is striking. They have the same dark hair, the same intelligent eyes, the same quick smile. But there's something different in Tyler's expression, an openness, a trust in the world that Marissa had lost by the time she was an adult. My daughter once gave me a lottery ticket that was worth $3, and I thought it was a message about my value in her life. What I learned too late was that it wasn't about value at all. It was about hope. She hoped I would win something that would make my life easier, the same way she'd hoped as a child. But somewhere along the way, hope had turned into entitlement, love had become manipulation, and disappointment had transformed into murder. Tyler saved my life by trusting his instincts and warning me to leave that party. In return, I saved his life by making sure his mother could never hurt him or anyone else again. It's a transaction that required the ultimate sacrifice, the life of my own child, but it was the only choice that preserved any possibility of justice. People talk about the bonds between parents and children as if they're unbreakable, sacred, absolute. But I've learned that some bonds become poisonous, that love can become a weapon, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to let go. My name is Evelyn White. I am 65 years old, and I killed my daughter to save my grandson and protect the world from a serial killer who happened to share my DNA. I sleep peacefully every night, knowing that Tyler is safe and that no one else will die at Marissa's hands. That knowledge is worth more than any inheritance, more valuable than any family bond, more precious than any mother's love. Sometimes, Justice requires a mother to choose between the child she raised and the children that child might hurt. Sometimes, the greatest love requires the ultimate sacrifice. I made that choice, and I would make it again. The quiet after the storm is the most honest sound in the world. It doesn't promise redemption or forgiveness or healing. It just promises truth. And the truth is that some people are too dangerous to live, even when we love them, especially when we love them. And there it is, Evelyn's truth in all its terrible complexity. She didn't just survive her daughter's attempt to murder her. She turned the tables and eliminated a serial killer who was hiding behind the mask of loving daughter and devoted mother. The final image of Tyler safe and happy, free from the fear that had shadowed his childhood, makes it clear that sometimes the most profound act of love requires the most devastating choice. This story challenges everything we think we know about family loyalty, unconditional love, and the lengths we'll go to protect the innocent. Evelyn chose justice over maternal bonds, Tyler's future over Marissa's life, and the safety of strangers over the preservation of her own family. If this story has affected you, share it, but more importantly, think about it. Think about the assumptions we make about the people we love, the red flags we ignore because they come from family, the dangerous loyalty that keeps us silent when we should speak up. Thank you for joining Evelyn on her journey. Subscribe for more stories that will challenge your understanding of right and wrong, love and justice, family and truth. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust your instincts, even when they're warning you about someone you love. Until next time, keep listening to those whispers of warning. They might just save your life.